white collar crime that I have a problem with, right? I wasn't addicted to doing crime. I was addicted to the drugs.
Tell me about your childhood, Rob.
Well, I had a good childhood. My mom was a single mom. Dad wasn't around, a lot of people go through that. But no, she gave me an awesome life. I had a really good childhood. I can't complain about that, right? My mom was a hustler. She used to make food at home and sell it on the side. She'd fucking sell toilet paper, jewelry, eggs. We'd go to the Smart and Final and buy shit in bulk, and I was a kid, and I'd go and all the deliveries with her and help her with all that stuff, help her make the food and all that. And so, everything she did, she really did it for me, to try and give me the life that, the life that I could have had in her mind, I guess, if I had both parents, right? And so I can't say anything bad about my childhood.
How old were you when your dad left?
I don't even remember my dad, to be honest. The only memory I have of my dad was, I had to have been like maybe 4 or 5 years old, somewhere around there. And one night, we needed milk, and there was a grocery store super close. And my mom told me, I'll be right back, I'm gonna lock the door, don't open the door for anybody. And so, had to have been like maybe 5-10 minutes after she had left, there was a knock on my door in the apartment that we lived in. And I walked up to the door and I asked who it was, and I heard the person on the other side say, "It's your dad." She's like, "Open the door." I said, "I can't, my mom's not here." And so I didn't, right? And eventually my mom showed up and I heard them talking. And then when my mom came in, my dad had left, right? So that's the only memory I have of him. When she came in, she had this gold necklace that he had given her to give to me. Come to find out as I got older that my dad was planning on kidnapping me and taking me to Mexico with him. So if I would open that door, I'd probably be somewhere out in Mexico right now. But that's the only memory I have of him. I tried to track him down. It's damn near impossible to track him down. If it's just such a crazy story, and that's a whole nother thing, because you have the name that he went by, which is the name that I have, Roberto Medina, isn't actually his name. And I just found this out just recently. So, which makes it so much harder to find him. So, yeah, my dad just wasn't around. My mom never talked bad about him. She was never one of those, women that, would just talk shit about, about the ex or whatever to the kids. Never once did my mom say anything bad about my dad. She would always encourage me to, or ask me, do you want to talk to him? Do you want to reach out to him? But, growing up with, someone as strong and independent as my mom was, I never really felt the need that I had to. I never really, so every time she would ask you, I would say no, right? I don't need him, which was true, But, when you get older, you start wondering, I wonder, you have questions of your own, that you want answers to. And so then you start going down that path, right? Which has been kind of difficult for me to find him. But yeah, no, other than that, I had a normal childhood. There was, I did everything I probably would have wanted to do. It wasn't until I was a teenager when I started, getting rebellious, right? I started smoking weed and, eventually started, doing coke, and then that went on to meth, right? And
why did you start doing drugs?
It wasn't even anything where, you wanted to cope with anything, at least not that I, was aware of. It was more of the environment that I grew up in, right? I grew up in LA, and, there's, the friends that I had were involved in that, and those were the friends I had. Not to, and you can't blame your friends, right? Yeah, your peer pressure or whatever, but it's just one of those things where you're hanging out with your friends, you're smoking weed too, and then you're at a party, you get drunk and someone pulls out coke, and I was always that kid that's like, I'll never do that. And then you're in a car with a bunch of other guys and they pull out some coke and you're already drunk. You're like, fuck it, let's do it. And it just snowballs, right? Because, I have an addictive personality. And so, yeah, it's just one of those things where you kind of get too caught up in that lifestyle, right? To where now you're addicted, hanging out with, with girls and, going out to clubs and, snorting coke and smoking meth and staying up all night. And, you're a teenager, you have no responsibilities, who gives a fuck, right? But, you don't realize the damage that you're doing to other people per se, because, now thinking back, I realized that, a lot of the things that I did as a teenager affected my mom because we were so close, right? It went from her having essentially a best friend, right? Every day we would do everything together. We'd go to the movies, we'd watch TV together, we'd cook together, to me being a teenager and starting to venture off on my own and then picking up these addictions, right? To what now I'm not home, And so my mom had to figure out how to cope with that, right? And seeing her only son go down this path that was not something that she had envisioned for me, right? And so, that was, hard for her, I would imagine. But, it's not something you think about. You don't really, I never really thought about that until, 20 years later. But yeah, no, it was just one of those things where you just kind of start getting involved in it, right? But when shit really hit the fan was my mom. So I ended up getting my girlfriend, this girl I was with throughout almost all my high school, and ended up getting her pregnant, right? When we were 18, and everything changes, you start trying to change your mindset, right? And you start trying to do the right thing. And, my daughter was born and my mom was there and she carried her, and I'll never fucking forget it, Shortly after that, 6 months later, my mom passes away. And, you're really left with, at least I was, with a lot of responsibility, an addiction. And it almost felt like I had no support, right? Because, even though I have family, most of my family's in Mexico, but I do have family that, at the time were close to where I was, and two older cousins and an aunt and an uncle. And then my mom had her friends, right? Who we would, when in the Latino culture, everyone's your aunt, your uncle, and your cousin, right? So that's what it was. But before my mom passed away, she used to say things that have stuck with me and really stood out to me after she had passed away. And one of them was, the day I die, you're gonna know who everybody is. And, as a kid, you don't really understand what the fuck that means, right? And so, but when she passed away, I started noticing that a lot of these friends or aunts and uncles and cousins that, that I was around and grew up with, started really pushing me to the side, right? And so, I start feeling like there's nobody that I can, lean on, right? And I didn't grieve, right? I didn't fucking cry when my mom died, And one of the biggest things that I felt guilt over is, because I was, an addict and doing all this, living that lifestyle. I remember the day that I found out and what exactly I was doing when I found out that my mom was dead. I was sitting in a garage, with the garage door closed, sitting in my car, getting high on coke. And, I remember there was no cell signal in there, and I had a phone, and I opened the garage, right? And I get out, I'm walking towards my apartment, and my phone starts blowing up, and it's everyone telling me, what had happened, right? So I rush over there to where my mom was. She was in the hospital, and I didn't go in to see her. I didn't want to. That really changed how, I guess, the path that I was going on, right? Because I could have picked two different ways, right? And even though I haven't had an addiction at the time, I had tried to go the direction that everybody else, or I should have gone down, which is be responsible, make sure you have a job, take care of your baby and your girlfriend, and all this stuff. But when my mom died, I kind of just said, fuck it, to everything, and I started, I really didn't care what I did or who I did it to as for who I was hurting, because I really didn't understand, that I was grieving. I was going through this really hard time trying to cope with the fact that the one person that raised you and was there with you, right, is now gone, and now you're truly alone. You have nobody, and not because some people try to be there, but you push them away. You're an addict. You don't want to talk to anybody. You fucking square. You want to go hang out with your friends. You want to go hang out with Sniper up in fucking up in the hills in fucking City Terrace or whatever, and get some coke from him.
Did any of it play into, you just got to be a man about this? You got to be a man, and just tuck in those emotions?
It didn't really, at least not in my mind, right? For me, it was like if I was numb. I just didn't. I remember sitting outside because my mom, what happened is that she had to have dialysis done, right? She had a stroke, and then she ended up in a hospital, and they told us, she needs dialysis, and she started dialysis treatment, and within a week she was dead. She had another heart attack and died. And, I remember I went to that dialysis center where she was, that hospital, the day that she had died, and I was sitting outside, and I was sitting on the ground, and I remember thinking, like, why am I not crying? I obviously felt sad, but it was almost like a shock, right? You don't really believe it because I hadn't seen her. Yeah, no, it wasn't really more of a, you gotta be a man and not show your emotions, but it was more of a numbness to where, you just kind of just wanna do what you wanna do. And those things that make you feel good aren't really good for you, and aren't really good for the people around you, And so that's really what I feel like it was for me. I kept going down that lifestyle, and I did hold jobs, I did sales for a long time, and, while being an addict, and, I ended up, sticking it with meth, which was my drug of choice, and I was functional, I guess, because the money I would get, I would spend. But it got to a point where you just can't hold the job because you're up for weeks, and then you don't wake up on time to get to work, and you get fired. People get pissed at you. They're not going to take that. So, you end up starting to find other ways to not just support your, newborn baby and your girlfriend, but support your habit, right? Because you have an expensive ass habit. When I was doing coke, I was like doing an 8-ball a day. When I was doing meth, I was doing a lot of meth, and so you start trying to figure out, and you start going down the road, well, I can be a dealer, right? And you start trying to sell it, but you're an addict, so you're doing your own shit. It's like, it doesn't work, Then you meet people that are just in that lifestyle that just, it just keeps you there, right? But, I ended up, I've always had a knack for tech, I always had a knack for a hustle. And I think I got that from my mom, right? Like I told you, she'd sell anything, resell shit. This is before affiliate marketing was a thing, and she was doing it, and so, I think I got that from her, but, I started messing around with, credit cards, and this is back in 2008, 2009, credit cards, and it was actually check fraud. I'd take routing numbers and stuff like that, and account numbers, and put them on different checks, and I was doing all that shit. That only lasts so long, right? Until you start getting cops on you, and they start figuring it out. But I ended up in LA County Jail. And I got arrested for 12 counts of identity theft and a residential burglary. LA is fairly lenient with first-time offenders. At that time I think I was still like 19 or 20. And so I end up in jail, and you end up in this situation or in this place that you never really thought as a kid you would be. But I remember not being scared. I just remember just kind of baffled. And when I got to LA County Jail, there's this intake, right? You have to go through processing, And it's this long ass fucking line because you gotta wait for all the buses from all the different other little cities to show up there. And I remember it's like boot camp. You know? It's like they tell you get in fucking line, and if you don't, you're gonna get flashlight therapy. And that's exactly what I saw. I saw some guy get beat to shit because he wouldn't get in line. I did that, and they gave me a year county lid, which in LA you don't do a year, you do maybe a couple months, and then they let you out because it depends on how packed the jail is. So they let me out on house arrest, and you're on probation, and did that whole thing, and or not, right? Because you're still an addict. So somehow I skated through house arrest, completed that, and was still on probation. But I kept using, and so kept going back, and then I get arrested again for possession, and so I'm still doing all this identity theft stuff on the side, and started messing with like gas cards and like all this weird stuff that you just think of when you're high.
What were you doing with gas cards?
I've already been convicted for all this, so it doesn't matter. But I used to sell gas. Essentially, it's all it is. You apply for a gas card, a credit card, under somebody else's name or a company or whatever it is, and you get them, and you fucking tell everybody, hey, if you need gas, it's 50 cents to the dollar, And I mean, no one's gonna say no. Everybody needs gas, so you meet them at the gas pump, and away you go. But I wasn't getting money off of that. I was getting drugs. That's the craziest part. It's like you're not even making anything. You're just smoking it. But you don't care. It doesn't matter. But after being in and out of jail here, I didn't end up in prison at that time. I did get a strike from that residential burglary, which I knew that if I went back and they decided, because they like to hand out strikes like candy in LA, and if I got another strike, I was gonna do a lot of time. And you get 3, you're doing life. So at that point, I'm like, well, I feel like I've been doing way too much here, and I need to get the hell out of here. And I don't know, it was weird. It was like, I don't know, some higher power heard, or someone was watching over me and said, hey, send them this opportunity. So I got a call because I was doing sales, and I was, I'm good at it. And I get an opportunity to go out to Boise, Idaho to help, a business who was just starting, and, and they flew me out, and, and that's how I got out of there, right? But, they say, like, there's an old saying, they say, wherever you go, there you are, right? So I thought, shit, I leave, I'm gonna sober up, and I'm gonna do good. And that was the case for a little bit. I got a house, and I was doing good. I gained a shitload of weight. I was fat. And that only lasted 6 to 8 months, maybe a year, right back to it. And so you keep doing what you were doing, kept doing drugs, and now I'm in a whole new state, and somehow ended up in Washington, and was doing the same thing, just hanging out with all these people, and start meeting all these shady ass people, being in trap houses. It's like, I still didn't really have a way to make money. I was doing sales, but again, if you're an addict, you're not going to work. You can only do it for so long. And so then I started messing with counterfeiting money, and I was pretty good at it. And that worked really good for a long time. And then, eventually, it catches up to you, and I got arrested at a hotel in Spokane, Washington by the Secret Service. And they fucking thought it was like, this was a whole operation. But they thought I was the brains behind this crazy operation. They thought that I had was laundering money, and it's like, in reality, the money was good enough to get their attention, right? But it was just me. Me and a printer that I bought at a fucking thrift store, and after all this research, right, tweaking out, knowing that that's the printer that can do it, That's how I was doing it. And yeah, I got arrested, and then I got slapped with, another 15 felony. What really, I don't want to say saved me, but gave me the opportunity to not continue to do what I was doing, right, was the fact that in Washington, they told me that really didn't have it wasn't a white collar crime that I had a problem with, right? I wasn't addicted to doing crime. I was addicted to the drugs. And because of the drugs, I was finding creative ways on how to fund this, right? And so instead of doing Fed time, the feds were like, we don't want them, we thought this was bigger than what it was, we're only gonna give them a year. Keep them, So the state kept me and gave me 3 years. And I told them, when I got to prison, I'm like, I have a drug problem, And I think what really flipped it for me in my mind was, number one, I was alone. I mean, my baby's mom was doing her thing, right? I mean, you're going away for 3 years. They're not gonna wait for you, especially when you haven't been around because you're a fucking addict, And none of my family was talking to me because you burned all your bridges, right? And so you're like truly alone. The one person that would have still been by your side is dead. And the other one has never been in your life. So you have no choice but to just sit in it and think about what you did, And so there was a lot of that. But in Washington, I met a counselor, and I can't remember her name, but I had one session with her, and I was telling her all this stuff that I'd done and my crimes and really about my life. And she told me, she looked me dead in the eyes and she said, "You've never grieved. You've never grieved. Have you cried? Have you?" And I'm like, "No." And so that really, her telling me that and the things that she recommended I did to help me grieve the death of my mom changed everything for me, because it changed my mindset. And once I was able to get through that grief, right, I was able to really tell myself, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm just done. This is stupid. This doesn't make any sense. Why am I gonna get out after doing these 3 years just to come back, right, to this place, And so, that's what happened. I got out and I had nothing but the shirt that they give you in prison, and the sweats, those gray sweats and a white t-shirt, and that's it, and a bunch of paperwork. No money, no friends, no family, just no one. And, you just kind of have to figure it out, And so that's what I did, It would take any job you could possibly get, whether it's fucking scrubbing toilets or, flipping burgers or, delivering food, whatever it was, I did whatever it took to get me out of that.
What did the counselor tell you to help you grieve?
She told me to write a letter. She told me to write a letter to my mom, and you think, I've written lots of letters, you write lots of letters when you're a kid, but writing a letter to someone that you loved that's dead, like if they were still alive, just opens up so many emotions, so many things that you say, so many things on that piece of paper that maybe you wish you could have said, or maybe you wish you could say now, right? Because, as time goes by, things change, right? You change. And so I did that. And then she had me burn it. She burned it because you're not allowed to have lighters. But she did. And so that really helped. And then a lot of it also had to do with me. I grew up in a religious household. My mom was Catholic. My whole family is Catholic. We would go to church on Sundays and, but I've never really truly believed in a higher power, right? at least not as a teenager or as a kid, right? Because it was just not something that I had a lot of interest in, or it just never really, resonated with me. But, when I had gotten out, after doing those 3 years, I tried to do things the right way. And, I went to a pawn shop and got a bike so I can get to work. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna go try and get my driver's license back. So I rode my bike to the DMV in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And I go to the DMV and I tell them, hey, I'm trying to get my license back. Can you tell me what I can do? They go back and they're taking a little bit longer than I would have expected. It was just weird. But I've got nothing to worry about, right? I mean, I'm doing everything by the book, right? I'm checking with my PO. I had just gotten out like a week ago. So I had checked in, I'm in a halfway house, I've got a job fucking right away. And so you don't think of anything that there's anything wrong. So they come back and give me this piece of paper and say, hey, you have these tickets, you gotta pay them. And so I say, okay, thanks. And I turn around and walk out, get back on the bike, and I'm riding the bike. And as I get into where this park was, right where Coeur d'Alene Lake is, I see these cop cars jump the curb and pull up on me and kind of box me in. And they come out and they know my name. They're like, Robert, and I'm like, what is going on? And so they're like, put your hands behind your back and cuff me up and take me back to jail. And I'm pissed because, they don't know why they're arresting you. They just know you have a warrant. And from what I knew, I had nothing, right? I just got out. So, I go from Coeur d'Alene, so from the county jail in Coeur d'Alene to the county jail in Spokane, to the county jail in Tri-Cities to see the parole board. And they tell me, when I see the board, they're like, and this takes like weeks. And so they tell me, so the reason you're here is because you got violated. And I said, for what? Well, you're on parole in 2 states, Idaho and Washington. And since you were in Idaho, in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, you never checked in with your PO in Washington. And I'm like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. If I'm on parole in 2 states and the state that I got out in was in Idaho and I'm in Coeur d'Alene, I checked in with my Coeur d'Alene PO. How are you guys not fucking communicating? And I said, we're sorry, you didn't check in. So they're like, go back to your cell and we'll let you know what happens. So I thought they were gonna just give me more time. And it was in that moment when I got back to it was a single man cell. I get back into my cell and I'm like, I'm pissed. Because you're trying to do shit the right way, you didn't do anything wrong, you did everything by the book. You got a job, you had a bike, you had a way to get to work, you had your head on right. And yet there you are again, again in the fucking revolving door, again going through the same shit that, every other kid in a fucking broken household goes through, right? From drugs to in and out of jail to, it's just a never ending cycle. And here I am. And I remember I dropped to my fucking knees and I said, God, what the fuck is going on? What did I do? Help me. And people think that I'm full of shit, but 5 minutes later, that cell door opens. And if you've ever been in jail or in prison, you know that sound, that loud plunk, where the door pops open. So my door pops open, and someone over the speaker says, Medina, roll it up. And I'm like, what the fuck? And so I go down, and I'm getting all my stuff back, right? And remember, I'm in Tri-Cities now. I'm not in Coeur d'Alene. I have no money, right? I had just gone out of prison. I'm barely trying to get my shit together. So now I'm like, what am I gonna do? So I'm getting my stuff that they had, and they're like, we're so sorry. It was our mistake. Here's a bus pass. We'll get you back to Coeur d'Alene. Don't worry. This was all a big misunderstanding. Your PO in Idaho told us that you did in fact check in with them. Next time, make sure you check in with both. I said, fucking thank you. And I left. And I think that's what, like, that experience that I had, whatever it was, coincidence, divine intervention, me, you know, actually finally getting down to my knees and admitting, right, that there is something bigger than us, right? Whatever it was, that was when everything just changed.